I'm super honored for our next guest. It was 2006. It might have been 2007. I think it was 2006. I was working for a software company, Infusionsoft.com. They're actually out in the pavilion. They'll be doing some sessions tomorrow, so that'll be great. Please check that out. We use them in everything we do to in our loan business as well, and on the marketing side of things. I received a call to come to a demographics school. I was like, a demo what? I was a mathematics and biology guy, so I didn't even know what they were talking about. But they said, we have a group of financial advisors here. We have a great network. We do these workshops typically once a quarter, and I think it would be a great fit. They need some marketing information, a suite of tools to do it. So anyways, I went out there, and I did a little presentation. And I met Harry Dent, so harrydent.com. It was his event, and he has a business partner. One of the business partners' names, Mr. Rodney Johnson, who we're about to bring up. And so over the course of that time, since we first met and throughout the years, we've done some programs together to the network, and I've had the great privilege to have many conversations with Rodney and his partners about what they're doing in business and in life and everything else. So I consider him a friend. I consider him a mentor. I told him what we were doing here at this summit when we first did our first one in June, and I said, it'd be great if you would take the time. I'd love to have you and be honored to fly you out here and address everybody, and from your perspective with an economic forecast and what you see in the marketplace, and coming at it from a very unique perspective that he also has invested in notes, which is very interesting. And so a little bit about background-wise, been with the Dent Network, harrydent.com for 20 years, Georgetown and SMU graduate, written several books, published hundreds of articles, thousands of articles probably at this point, and just done many great things. And so we're very excited to have Mr. Johnson come and address all of us. He's been very gracious to answer any questions that you may have towards the end of his presentation. You can hold them until then, and then if you'd like any photos or to have any more questions answered, he'll join us over for our networking party this evening. So it's my pleasure. Please give a round, warm welcome, big round of applause to Mr. Rodney Johnson.
He lied. Just know he lied. He said, would you come to San Diego in February? You betcha. Just sign me up. I don't know what it is. I'll go to San Diego in February. People ask me to go to Baltimore in February. There's not a chance in hell I'm going to Baltimore in February. When you have your own business, as most of you do, you get to choose some things. It's a nice place to be. As he told you, my job is to talk about the economy. I'm supposed to walk around here and tell you everything that's going to happen over the next 3, 5, 10 years so that you can make a bunch of money. Does that work? People like that. That's a good job to have. Now, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't shake it up and tell you exactly what's coming, but I can give you some really good ideas. And the main theme here is to see the turns in the road. Most people don't ever think about this when it comes to economics. They think what's going to happen tomorrow is the same as what happened yesterday. Their forecast is nothing but a straight line. It's like driving down the road looking in the rearview mirror. As long as what happened just before is what's coming, you're doing pretty good. But if you reach a turn in the road, you're going to drive right off the cliff. It happens. The turns happen. That's why we developed a different way of looking at the economy so that we could see the turns. We don't use the normal way of approaching things. When you're talking about economics, when you're talking about people who are kind of pulling the levers of economics and monetary policy and fiscal policy and whatever, they're using an approach that we don't think makes any sense. They're using something called the rational man principle. Now, this is real. This is what your economic life is based on, people. This is what they're doing. The way it works is, when you have an economic theory, the first thing you do is assume, as my grandfather used to tell me, make an ass out of you and me, that everybody will make a rational choice when faced with, prioritization. You have to assume this. And once you assume they're going to make a rational choice, well, then it's easy. You just figure which choice is rational, and that's what people are going to do, right? Now let's think about this for a minute. Think about all the decisions you've made with money. Think about all the decisions you've seen other people make with money. Were they all rational? Did they all make a lot of sense? Your life, whether you want it to be this way or not, is based on the rational man principle. And yet I know that if we're basing everything on this, yeah, we're pretty much toast. It doesn't work. We continue to frustrate people who build monetary policy and fiscal policy, and I'll get into some of that in a little while. We looked at it differently. We said, well, if people aren't rational, they're acting irrationally, what can we do? We can look at how people move in a herd. Our economic theory, our point of view, is that people move in groups, really big groups. And if I can see what they're doing, I've got some power. Now, I don't know what everybody's doing. I don't know what you individually are doing. I don't know what each person on their own is going to do. But I know what big groups do. And I had to go through a process to figure it out. The first thing I asked myself is, why are they doing such things? I said, well, if I need to know why, I need to find their point of pain. People don't move when they're comfortable. When you're comfortable, you stay where you are. You're kind of lazy, you're sitting on the couch. You're not going to go do anything, you're pretty comfortable. You have to be uncomfortable to start to move. So I had to figure out what economically causes pain. And I think I found the answer. It's kids. I mean, I have 3 kids. My 3 children cause me economic pain. I have a 21-year-old and a 20-year-old, both in college, and I have a 17-year-old that's in my house. Which one do you think causes me the most pain? Yeah, the one at home. See, the older 2 are in college, and they're pretty great, good kids. They're all good kids. But what happens with the older 2 is the oldest one I never hear from. He's all right. He's kind of out there floating on his own. He's cheap. The middle one, she and money, they're not really friends. They part ways a lot. And so she always ends up short at the end of the month. And like clockwork, the 25th of the month, I get a text, usually at 1 in the morning. Hey, like I'm awake, right? And it's, this is how much I need for the next month, and if you could deposit it tomorrow, that'd be great. Next month, tomorrow, next month, tomorrow. So of course, she tells me how much it is. The next morning I get up, I look at it, I transfer money to her account, and that reminds me, transfer money to her brother's account. He never says anything. And we go about our merry way. It's very different with the 17-year-old. With the 17-year-old, I got to judge how things are going in the morning. She goes to school about 7:10. She gets up at 7:02. She goes to an all-girls school, so her appearance doesn't matter. She comes out of her room, goes to the bathroom, comes out into the kitchen where I'm reading the paper, and I say, good morning. And there are 2 responses possible. The first one is, and then she leaves. If I get groaned at, I have no pain. This is important. If instead she comes out of the bathroom, walks over to where I'm reading the paper and says, hi, Dad, I, as Pavlov's dog, have a response. I do this. Here. If she speaks to me, she clearly needs money. It is the only reason she talks to me. She's a great kid. I really like her. But I know at 7:10 in the morning, we really have little to share. And so she comes to me, and we talk about this. And I will let you in on a secret. I, being a mathematical person, I have a long background in math, I thought it was a statistical anomaly of the universe that everything cost $20. I thought every school outing, every meal after school with friends, every movie she went to was $20. I was wrong. I found out the statistical anomaly is in my wallet. What my kids found out years ago is, Dad has $20. Dad has lots of $20. He doesn't have anything else because he goes to ATMs that spit out $20. If you ask him for $9, he'll look for 9 stupid dollars. Ask for $20. Something they also don't know. This is my get out of jail free card. When she says, hi, Dad, I am $20 away from not talking to a 17-year-old anymore. That's important. So I know that kids cause pain. If I know that, then I can figure some things out, right? I know that how we spend money has to do with kids. And it's absolutely true. If I can follow how we spend money and how we spend money on our life cycle, I can start to figure some things out. We get married around 26 in the United States of America. When I was 26, my boss said to me, son, because in Texas, every impart of knowledge starts with son. He said, son, you're never richer than the day before you get married. Some of you are taking longer to figure that out than others. I knew what he meant. He meant that the day after you get married, you must explain why you spent the money. You're no longer 100% in control of your bucket of money. But he lied. He should have said, son, you're never richer than the day before you have children. Because now it really doesn't matter what you think of it. You're still going to spend it. I don't care how much or how little you have. When you have children, you're spending more on them. It's the way the game is played. We get married around 26, we have kids at 28, and we start spending money. We spend on baby clothes and cribs and strollers, and then we spend on pictures, and then we spend on more clothes and lessons and all sorts of crazy stuff. We do it for 20 long years, and then they leave. And hopefully we're not spending on them anymore. Our goals change. We got something else going on, right? We're now focused on us, and that makes a big difference. Now, when we look at this, we want to know how people spend their money because it's important, and we want to look at it in terms of their family. And we found something called the Consumer Expenditures Survey, which the government does. It's a big survey every year, 5,000 to 7,000 respondents, blah, 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 diary of what you spend. And we know that people track very consistently year over year by age. And we found people spend on certain things very consistently, things as simple as potato chips. I know that you spend the most on potato chips when you're 42 years old. I also know you're probably not buying them for yourself, right? You're not sitting at home at 42 thinking, well, should I have barbecue or sour cream and onion for dinner? Which one's going to work tonight, right? You're instead buying them for your kids because you have kids at 28, 14 years later, they can't drive anywhere, so they're bugging the snot out of you as they eat all your food. We spend the most on fast food at 43. When they're 15. Something magical happens when they're 16. They can leave without us. They want to go. We want them to go. We no longer have to go to McDonald's with them, right? It wasn't good for us anyway. And so we see fast food spending peak at about 43 years old. We know a lot of different spending patterns. We know these on the way up in our spending life toward the peak. We know that about 20 years old, we enter the workforce, get married around 26. Have that child around 28, child care, trade up home at 42. That's an interesting thing. We buy our first home around 33. That's the most debt to income we tend to have in our lives, 33 years old. It's not the most debt we're going to have. It's the most debt to income we're going to have. Around 42, 44, the kids are 14, 15 years old, and we realize something very important. We want them further away, right? I need a bigger home in the 40s because my kids are older and louder. It's not because I'm older and I go to sleep at 9:30. It is because they're older and louder, obviously. And so we buy a bigger home, we get them further away, and we have that nice house that we then furnish and everything, and we keep spending more money. We peak in our spending kind of at the top of that wave in our late 40s, buying furniture for that house and buying motorcycles. This is something we talked about for a long time. Why would you buy a motorcycle when you're 48? Kids are about 20. You don't talk to them. They don't talk to you. You've got some money. You go buy a motorcycle. It's what we do. You think this is kind of funny. Harley Davidson thinks this is really important. Harley Davidson sells $25,000 motorcycles to aging professionals. They don't sell scooters to guys just out of high school. They need all of us buying bikes. And we did. We bought bikes right up until the huge group of boomers passed that magic age of 45, 48, and then we didn't buy bikes anymore. And Harley Davidson saw their sales start to slide. And they knew why. And so they started branching out. Overseas, women, minorities. People they hadn't looked at in a long time for motorcycles. But you look at their ads now. It's women in the United States right now. So we peak college tuition at 51. Cars actually peak at 53, 54. Now, I'll get to some more of this in a minute. Peak spending in the United States for individuals is 47 to 49. It's kind of this top, this gradual top. It is not everyone. I know that. If you have more education or more income, chances are your peak in spending is a little bit later, probably in your early 50s, 53, 54. Chances are you worked on your career a little bit before you started having children, so it's pushed out a little bit. It also doesn't mean that when the children leave and you're spending less, you're living like a pauper. You're not eating beans and rice trying to save money for retirement. That's not how it works. What you're not doing is borrowing. Factored money is a really cool thing. When I borrow money to spend, I'm supercharging the economy, right? I'm spending money that I did not earn. I'm creating money out of thin air. The two ways you create money in an economy like ours, you print it by the Federal Reserve, or you have a bank lend you somebody else's funds that they deposited, fractional reserve. If I go through the fractional reserve system and I lend out all the deposits, then I've created a supercharged economy, and that's what we were doing. When you don't spend on credit, you don't supercharge the economy. That's going to be important here in a little while. So this is what we do at the top of the cycle. When we start to go down on the other side of our spending, when we're actually trying to spend a little bit less, life insurance peaks around 58, hospitals and travel at 60, cruise ships at 70, really surprising. I know. Medicare copay at 74, and prescription drugs at 77. This particular chart shows a down trajectory. Now that's because it's based on age and spending, right? As you get older, your spending ramps up into your late 40s, early 50s, and then it rolls back over and slows down some, not using as much borrowed money. These are the things that are favored for the next 15 to 20 years. Not a lot of growth industries here, right? Pharmaceuticals I get, some healthcare I get, but this is what we're looking at is the boomers, those people who continue to drive the economy right now. This is where they're going. I'll get to that in just a minute too. So once I know how we spend money by age, I need one more piece of information to be dangerous. I need to know how many people are at each age. And so what we did is we created the Immigration Adjusted Birth Index. And it looks like this. This is a graph of everyone born in the United States, starting back in 1953, and then we add in migrants. If you show up today and you're 20 years old, I'm going to put you back into 1995. I need you in your right birth year. Got that? This information is harder to come by than you might imagine. You do not go to the Census Bureau and take a snapshot and then kind of spread it all out. The Census Bureau doesn't care how many people are here this year and then how many people are here next year. If you go look at their data on their website, they'll show 2 million 4-year-olds in 2014, and they'll show 1.8 million 5-year-olds in 2015. Believe me, 200,000 of those kids did not pass away or suddenly decide to leave the United States. That's not how their math works. They only work in a silo. And I'm only telling you this because people ask us these questions. We're interested in tracking people year to year, which is why we went and did this work from the National Center for Health Statistics and a couple of other places. We get our immigration data from what used to be Immigration and Naturalization Services, is now ICE, and they do include illegal immigration in their estimates. And so we've got all those things covered. And what you see here is the big run-up, of course, is the baby boomers. And that's not a surprise, right? The huge run-up, the generation actually started in 1937. We hear the term boomer applied to people born in 1946 through about 64. That's a marketing term. It means people who weren't alive during the war, who grew up with television, they grew up with the whole Russian communist scare, the whole bit. It's a way of looking at the world. The actual run-up in people started in 1937, and it peaked in 1961. That's the group we're tracking. They have the most power in the economy because it's the most concentrated increase in births of any generation. There's another generation out there. Here at the end, and this has a cool green laser pointer on it here, these are the echo boomers, or the children of the boomers. It's kind of spread out. There's as many of them, but they're not as concentrated in years, so they don't have as much power. So that's why we're tracking these boomers through the system to see what they're doing next. They're the ones that have pushed so many different things. If you remember when they went through elementary school and then when they went through college, they got into the workforce in the 70s. Everything they did, they kind of changed as they got there. It's the way the system works. If I want to know what's going to happen in any industry that I can track in spending, I take this chart and I move it forward. If I want to know when potato chips are going to peak, I take that chart and move it forward 42 years. And it should show me at the top of the graph when potato chip sales, or salty snacks, as the government calls them, will peak. Well, 1961, 42, 2003. That's how it works. Motorcycle sales, 45 to 48, 1961, 45, 2006 to 2009. It was right on time. Harley-Davidson sales rolled over in 2007, long before the downturn. And as they said in Fortune magazine, they were fighting an enemy they couldn't even see. It was changing demographics. There just weren't as many aging professionals out there to buy the bikes. Cereal peaks at about 38. Well, your kids are about 10 years old, right? They don't eat as much cereal after that. So we can follow everything through. The broader economy tracks overall spending, age 47 to 49. So I move this chart forward for those years, and I get the Immigration Adjusted Birth Index lagged for peak spending. The peak here is about 2008 to 2010. There's good news and bad news, right? The bad news is you're looking at this now. The good news is we've been using the same chart for, I don't know, Clark, 20 years? 20 years. We've known Clark 20 years. And so we've been doing this and telling people about it for a really long time. This is economic activity. This is the number of boomers or number of people in the United States at their peak spending year. And so we've been trying to inform people that you can track the economy in general by this chart. And if you had done that, when Harry Dent started this before I met him in 1988-89, you would have been looking at this information right about here. And you would have seen this huge run coming over the next 2 decades. That would have been pretty darn useful. But it changes. That's the turn. We were out there in 2004, 5, 6, 7, and early 2008 telling people the turn's coming. We're going to reach a point where this thing rolls over because the boomers are passing their peak in spending. And there isn't a whole lot you, being the government, being anyone, can do to make them spend if they don't want to. And this is where the rational man principle comes into play. The Federal Reserve has made interest rates on your money market what? Zero is a really good answer right here, people. And on your deposit account, how much are they paying? Zero. The rational man principle, and this is not a guess, this is not just something I made up because it's kind of fun. The rational man principle says you are supposed to take every single nickel out of those accounts and go spend it on something that provides you more use and utility today. How many of you have drained your accounts because interest rates are zero? Nobody. It doesn't account for what we want to do. We have a goal. We want to save it. We have future utility. And so we're willing to accept the pain of not no return, negative return, because you're losing money every day, right? You know this. You're willing to accept negative return to have the money available to you at a later date. There is no economic theory for that. That's the problem. So if you can look at this, you can figure out why people are doing things and how they might behave based on what's going on in their family life. We overlay it with the Dow. It worked really good for a long time, and then it didn't. We had some peaks in there. The market peaked about when we thought it would, although not at the level we thought it would. It fell like we thought it would, and then the market has exploded. I know economic activity is not great. I know the economy has a lot of troubles. I also know that the Dow is at an all-time high. I cannot explain that to you. I have my own theory. There are no other places to invest with a bunch of money. You have a lot of people putting money in retirement accounts. You have assets flowing over here from overseas because we are, as they say, the cleanest shirt in the dirty laundry basket. None of that makes me feel good, right? I personally have my money in the stock market. I may think the market's going to roll over. I do believe that we're headed for a downturn, but I also like my money to grow. So I'm going to be wrong, and I'm going to have my money in there, but I'll be one of the first ones pulling it out when this thing rolls over. This is daily spending from Gallup. They started tracking this long before 2008. But I thought it was interesting because we started using this, and it's really hard to see. Just the gist of it is, back in 2008, we were spending around $100 a day as individuals. It dropped to about $65 a day, and it slowly crept back up over 6 to 7 long years. What's very interesting about this chart is it's not adjusted for inflation. And so our spending is still far below what it was per person back in 2007, 2008. This is the real personal consumption expenditure chart. It comes from the Federal Reserve. Every quarter they measure personal consumption. And I love this chart because this starts back in 1995. I can take it back to 1990, but the numbers are tiny, so it really doesn't matter. The point is, we went through this long period where growth was kind of going up in a straight line. And you know what? That's kind of boring until you put a little thought into it. 1997, we had the Asian contagion. We had several Asian countries that were melting down in their currency. And we spent more money. This is what we spent as consumers in the United States. We had Russia default on their bonds in 1998. We didn't care. Long-term capital management pretty much got real close to blowing up the U.S. financial system. Nobody really cared. We had 9/11. I got a lot of calls on 9/11 because people said, well, does that change your forecast? I was like, well, we'll have to see. You can't find 9/11 on this chart. My uncle was stranded at DFW Airport. I lived in Dallas at the time. I don't talk to him very often. I like him, but I don't talk to him. He called me at 11:15, and he said, Rod, this is your uncle. I was like, all right, we're going to start there. I'm your nephew. Okay, let's go. And he said, I am at DFW in 19 minutes, because he's military. They have to be precise like that. In 19 minutes, we're all leaving the campus. When I say the campus, I mean DFW Airport. They forced all planes to the ground. They're taking us to the gates, and they're locking them. There are no rental cars and there are no hotels. You need to come get me. All right then, good to talk to you too. So I drove out to DFW and I got my uncle. It's about 1 p.m. and we did what everybody else in the United States of America did. We went to lunch, right? Restaurants were packed. Everybody's talking about this. And then there's anthrax, which we never solved, by the way. And all we did was spend money. We got into 2 wars that we were in for a decade and we kept spending money. We had Hurricane Katrina in 2005, and we kept spending money. We had oil over $100 in 2006, and we kept spending money. We had all these events happen, and all we did was spend. And then it rolled over. You can call it a crisis, you can call it whatever you want, but it wasn't really an event in 2008, 2009. It was a culmination. It was kind of this building of itself, and it was boomers spending on credit. And they spent on credit, as we all did, in dramatic fashion. And the more they spent on credit, the more money looked easy. Everything goes up, so issue more credit. And it kept going and going. And when it finally started to roll, because the next guy wasn't buying, that's when it imploded on itself. It took no event. It took no terrorism. It was just a slower purchase on credit. And then we get to the next piece. That rollover there is 2008, 2009. That's obvious. Well, then we've got the part where we don't come back to the line. Why haven't we caught up? Nobody in this room has ever been in the United States before this period where we've printed trillions of dollars because we've never done it. And yet, what's happened? A lot of nothing. Interest rates are historically low. The Federal Reserve is stealing your money as savers. I get that. But we have not just ramped up economic activity. As a matter of fact, we're struggling to get past 2%. 2%. $4 trillion. We're not taking the bait, people. We're not acting rationally. Because that's not what the boomers want to do. They've got a whole different set of goals. So this chart, more than any other, proves our point as to why people wouldn't stop spending, and now why they won't spend more. We also look at things in generational waves. Every 40 years, you get a generation, and it comes in 2 pieces. You get 26 years of kind of a growing wave, which is the longer part, and then you get 14 years of down. If you're basing things on growing generations of people, of more people in the economy, then clearly when you have that growth in people, in the number of people, those are your good years. And then when you have a drop, those are your bad years. And you have another one that runs up as good, and then another down as bad. And so if you can think of it in these 40-year cycles with 26 up and 14 down, then you'll see how the waves occur. And they tend to happen where you'll get a big ramp and then a drop, and then the second one meets it. And then you'll get another big ramp. And so every other generation, you get a large increase in people in the population. If you put these together, you get our seasons of the economy. And we have spring, summer, fall, and winter. The years are across the bottom. You see down there that we have the boomer generation basically is born in the spring. It's a huge run-up in people. And then you get the drop, and you get the increase. Well, that's a generational spending cycle. They came into their peak spending years about 20 years after the peak. So 1961 was the peak number of boomers. 1981 is when you have them start spending at a rapid clip. And so they're starting to spend more. They spend until their late 40s. And so you get this huge boom in what we call the fall season. The fall season is where everything comes together. You not only have a huge generation spending, but your interest rates tend to be low because you have a lot of productivity from the population. We've come out of that. After you get the fall season, you get the backside. Right now, there is a generation at their peak in spending. Who is it? It's after the boomers. It's Gen X. Do you know why they're called Gen X? They never got named. Literally. The baby boomers were given a marketing name. The next generation was called Generation X. Because there's so few of them, we just don't care. Why would you market anything to a small group? It makes no sense. That's literally how they got their name. And so here's this small group of people that's at their peak in spending for homes, and they're at their peak in spending for all sorts of things, and nobody markets to them. It's all about the boomers and the millennials, isn't it? There's a reason. There's lots of them. So you've got this small group that's at its peak in spending and can't possibly keep the economy growing at the same rate that it was before. And you got the largest group who's actually on the decline over there, which causes the economy to fall and it causes interest rates to drop. Interest rates drop because they're not demanding money. Interest rates are the cost of funds. And people don't think about it that way, but that's what it is. If I want money and you want to lend it, we're going to strike a deal. If you've got a bunch of people wanting to borrow your money, you're going to raise the cost. You're going to increase the interest rate. If not many people want to borrow your money, then frankly, you've got to drop the cost to get it out the door. Interest rates are the cost of money, and there's not a lot of demand for it. The hallmarks of a winter season, which is what we're in, you're going to see falling inflation or outright deflation. This is a lot of stuff that actually Aaron and I talked about at demographic school when he came a lot of years ago. You're going to have low interest rates, as we talked about, because you're going to have a lower demand for cash. You're going to have a weak jobs market. Companies don't have as much business. That doesn't make them not profitable. People always make that mistake. Companies will manage down to the level of profitability, right? Right now, what are companies doing with their cash? They're buying back their shares. It's a huge deal, share buybacks. And it's because they're looking forward and going, guess what? My clientele's not growing. I'm making cash. If I can lower the number of shares in the marketplace, I can raise my earnings per share. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're doing it by the billions. They're still profitable, and they're pushing up their PE ratio, their price-earnings ratio, by buying back shares. They don't see enough growth out there going forward to go invest in new technology, new plants and equipment, new stuff. They're like, why would I do that? The market's not growing. Falling wages is part of it because you have lower business activity, you have fewer need for employees, and so, frankly, you don't hire as many. And so you have too many people applying for the jobs that are available. We've had falling unemployment in the United States, but it came at the cost of lower participation rates. Now, I'm not on the same side of the fence as a lot of people. You'll hear a lot of people say, well, all these people aren't looking for jobs, and so what we really did is lose a lot of productive people. I did the math on this. We did lose, I would say, about 8 million people. 5 million of it is attributable to the boomers retiring. A lot of people say boomers aren't retiring. A lot of people in this room are boomers who will not retire. You're going to keep working as you get older. You're the weird ones. Look around, people. There's only a few of you in the room. I mean, there's a few hundred. There are millions of the boomers. Most people, I always love these surveys. They asked the boomers, in 2000, well, you're going to retire? And they said, hell no, I'm not retiring. I'm working till I'm 1 million. That's because they were 40. You're Superman when you're 40. When you're 50, you're not quite Superman anymore. When you're 60, you've seen some siblings pass away. You had some friends pass away. You've dealt with your parents passing away, usually. By 62, you hate everybody you work with. You just want to leave. You're like, are you kidding? I won't spend another day in this place. So I get that a lot of boomers won't retire, and actually it is a bigger number, but it's not as big as you might think, right? We've still got 65, 70% of boomers that are leaving the workplace by 65 to 70 years old. It's really big. 21% was the last number I saw of people in the workforce over 70 years old, 21%. So that tells you 79 are out there saying, nope, I'm not doing this. So at 62, the number of people working starts to drop dramatically. My point is that they're still doing the normal things at the normal times. That is a fall in the participation rate in the economy in terms of the workforce. And so you do have a drop in unemployment because of some of that. You also have a lot of people working part-time and a lot of people marking their work doing things like Uber. So there's this flexible work going on. Falling commodity prices, falling asset prices. This is where we get into that sticky wicket called gold. I don't have anything up here on gold in the rest of the presentation, but we do study it. We do know a lot about it. We think of gold as a commodity. Gold is not money. That one I know for a fact. The reason I know that for a fact is no government accepts gold as payment right now or has their money backed by gold. None. Nobody. And anybody who tells you, well, every paper money system out there in the history of the world has failed, they're sort of wrong. The ones that are in existence today are still going. But I know for a fact every money system based on gold has failed because there isn't one. It doesn't mean they won't come back. I'm not saying that it's right or wrong. I'm kind of a hard money guy. That would be much better for me as a citizen. Governments don't like hard money because it removes one of their biggest hammers to be able to change the valuation for their benefit. So it's a long conversation, but we see gold as a commodity in this environment because it's not used as money right now. But we don't have soup lines either. This isn't what we do. We got rid of soup lines. We instead chose to deal with this through the U.S. mail, right? We send everybody an EBT card or a SNAP card. This is people on food stamps, what were food stamps when we were kids. Now it's Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program. In 2008, there were about 25, 26 million people. Now there's over 45 million Americans on SNAP. 45 million. That's 15% of the population. That's a lot of money. The busiest time in Walmart is the 11 o'clock hour on the last day of the month. Because at midnight, everybody's EBT card resets. So it's the way the game is played. So we are in a difficult economic position. I know this to be true. You know this to be true. We are in the economic winter season, and it does last. We see it going until about 2020, 2024, somewhere in there. We're not alone. This is going on in the United States. It's going on around the world. Most developed countries are in the exact same place we are because they had the same population trend we did. They had a huge boom in population after World War II. Japan is the outlier. They're number one of problem children demographically around the world. They had a baby bust after World War II. They actually started with a baby boom in 1946, 7, and 8. And then the Japanese government looked at it and said, well, we were bombed to the Stone Age, and we have to replace everything, and we're having a bunch of kids. These two things can't happen. And so they asked everyone to not have children. They made it a point of national pride that if you had 2 children, you would have no more. And they made it very easy to have abortions. People don't talk about it. I don't know why. But you saw their birth rate drop like a rock. And you saw their productivity in their building fly. It worked because they could spend the money that they were generating on the current population without spending it on kids. So they hit their population top much earlier, their peak in spending. They hit it in about 1989, 1996. And what did they do? Pretend and extend. They kept pretending that they were going to come out of it. They kept extending all of this credit that they had on the balance sheet of banks that wasn't going to be repaid. And they did this until about 2002, 2003. They finally started writing some of it off. But the Japanese have been in a funk for over 20 long years. Japanese real estate was negative from 1990 through 2006. It did not have an up year. That's a long slump. In Japan, they're going backwards in population. There are fewer Japanese today than there were last year. It's been that way since 2005. Every year they're losing more people. They're expected to lose 1/3 of their population by 2050. 1/3. They just have no kids. The United States is on there, 2003 to 7. Germany, you can read the list. It's a who's who of all the developed countries. When you look at Germany, their drop is dramatic, but what's more dramatic is they don't have any resurgence. They had this birth, and then this is the 47-year lag, and then it drops because they don't have any kids. The Germans literally do not have a young working set to come along and take the jobs. That's why their unemployment rate is so low. We don't know what's going to happen with them. Are they literally going to age out of existence? We put up a chart or an infograph here on the gainers and sustainers and decliners. You can't read it because it's too far away, but the interesting part about the gainers is Israel, Australia, Switzerland, Sweden. I can't even read that other one. I am not old. My eyes are not that bad. I keep telling myself that at night, and it's still not true. And New Zealand. All these countries are like thumbprints, on a huge map. They're tiny. They just don't have enough people in them. The big countries are the ones that are in trouble. We're actually a sustainer. We're in the middle because we have children. And you know why we have children? Because we have immigration. It just is what it is. If you've been here more than 2 generations, chances are you have less than 2 kids. If you've been here less than 2 generations, chances are you have 4 kids. You do the math. People who are immigrants have a bunch of children. It's changing right now, but that's been the case. And we kind of share this whole value cultural system, and so it kind of all flows together. The Europeans do not have that luxury. If you look at the worst ones, in terms of the ones who are going to decline the fastest, Japan tops the chart, of course. Germany's number 2. Portugal, Italy, Spain, and Greece. Notice anything there? Yeah, the people that suck in Southern Europe right now, they're not coming back. There's no plan, there's no forward thinking, there's no austerity or cutting pensions that's going to make this happen. These people don't have kids. And so you may make them look pretty good for a few years, but that's lipstick on the pig. This is not going to get better for them. And then you come down to people that you wouldn't think. Taiwan, South Korea, Austria, Netherlands. Austria is kind of a weird one in there. But Taiwan and South Korea. I think of South Korea as the next Japan. China is in a world of hurt because of the one-child policy, something that we've talked about for a long time. They have a declining workforce right now in terms of work-age people. And there's no plan for what they're going to do with this. But they put a policy into place in basically 79, 80 that said if you have more than 1 kid, you pay a penalty, blah, blah, blah. In the rural areas, it's a little different. But they believe they saved themselves at least 400 million births. 400 million. The South Koreans had no such policy. They just didn't have the kids. They just stopped. And what happened is they all did the same thing, as in China. They focused all of their attention, all of their money, all of their efforts on 1 kid. That's it. And so now the governments are trying desperately to have them have more than 1 kid because the governments recognize this as a problem. And so they said, have 2. And they're looking at it saying, are you an idiot? Do you know how much it cost me for this 1? I can't possibly do this for 2. Because they really don't have the assets to pay for the education and all the things that it takes. So nobody's having them. Most of these countries run government-funded dating programs. Of all the things I want to find from my government, my wife is not one of them. The whole thing sounds bad, right? I don't know how they would do that. So the boomers, getting back to them and what they're doing, they're focused on saving more and paying down debt. So if you're looking to save more, clearly you should be putting more money away. So let's see how they're doing. This is the average American information. It comes from the Survey of Consumer Finance, which the Federal Reserve does every 3 years. It gives you a really nice panel to compare. And the Federal Reserve, being smart people with money, they adjust for this for inflation. So all the numbers you see on there are comparable to each other because they have been adjusted. A couple of interesting things. Median family income, 2001, every 3 years, goes up $53,200 in 2004, and then drops. Well, that's no fun. And this is median. One more thing I love about the Fed. It means 50% of everybody is above and 50% is below. These are not skewed by people with big numbers at either end. College degrees, we're still running about 37, 38%. That doesn't change very much. Everybody wants to say most people are going to college. It's not true. Most people who make it through high school go to college for a class or two. Most of them don't graduate, by the way. We still get about just over a third of Americans getting a college degree. Only 38% of Americans carried a credit card balance over the end of the month. That's something you hear skewed all the time. Americans have all these balances. It's not true. The median balance was $2.3 thousand, so $2,300. There's just not a ton out there because we're not doing it. And if you look at credit card debt, I'll show it to you in a minute, although I don't have the figure out there like that. Credit card debt has actually been shrinking. Where we were at about $900 billion in credit card debt, we're now running about $675 billion. We're just not putting more on credit cards because that's not what the boomers want to do. The thing that catches my attention, have a retirement account. It got up to 65% in 2007 and has fallen to 56.5%. So just over half of Americans who are between 45 and 54 actually have a retirement account. That should not make you feel good. And of those people that have, it now has $87,000 in it. If you're 54 years old and you have $87,000 in your retirement, you're behind, right? This is a problem. But you know it. It's not a surprise. You got the kids through college. You lived through the downturn. You're looking at this and thinking, buddy, I am like a laser beam. I am focused on paying down debt and saving. That's my job. This is no longer about having a bigger house than that guy and having 22-inch rims on a Hummer, right? You don't see those anymore. They used to be in everybody's driveway, and now people are like, oh, well, I saved. Remember when it was cool to spend? Now it's cool to save. This is what it's about. On the other side of the ledger, we got rid of some debt. A lot of little numbers on here, but the main thing to take away is the orangish color is mortgage debt. And so you can see where it all peaked in the middle there, which was 2008, 2009, and then it declined. And mortgage debt actually started walking up just a little bit over here, just a touch. The other things kind of expanded and contracted. The peak was here, dropped, and then it started coming back up a little bit faster. I'll deal with mortgage debt first, and then we'll go to the others. This is not broken out per capita. And that's one of those things you got to think about. We have more mortgage debt on the books today than we did in 2013, right back here. Okay, I get that. We've also added 20 million some odd people to the population and the working age population since 2008. So we've got a whole lot more people out there of age to be buying a home and dealing with this. And yet all we've been able to add is this little bit of mortgage debt. So what you're seeing is boomers paying off as some others are taking on, kind of that back and forth. On the other, the consumer credit up here, it's HELOCs and student loans and autos and whatever. It's really hard to see which ones are growing and which ones aren't. So I'll help you here. See if you can pick the outlier. Can you tell which one's growing faster than others? That would be student loans. There's a reason we're all talking about this. When I say we all, I mean weird people like me who talk about the economy all the time. When I look at this is from 2003, and it's indexed to 100. And so you start at 100, and you'll see, let's see, down here, credit cards are green. They peaked in 2008 and continued to drop, and we're actually back down to where we were in 2003. And so you've got auto loans are up a little bit. They're about 50% higher. And then you've got student loans. 450% of what they were in 2003. $1.16 trillion in student loan debt. Yeah, that kind of sucks the life out of the room, doesn't it? So one of the greatest gifts I'm giving my children is they will get out of college with no debt. And I tell them that every time I have them on the phone. Actually, I'd love to say when I have them on the phone. I tell them that every time I text them. By the way, you have no debt. So, because it's important, because most of their friends do. And so student loan debt is the thing that's become the albatross. It is the big stone around the neck where these people can't do the normal things in life in their 20s because they're looking at a job where they're making 40 grand and they got a student loan payment of $800. You tell me how that works out. And so it's very, very difficult. And in the cruelest of ironies, the people with the highest debt are the ones with the most education. So you take your brightest people that are going to be leaders of tomorrow, that rise the highest in education, and give them the most debt. That's brilliant. We have built a system that's brilliant. But since basically I have the rest of the day, I can tell you anything I want. I'll tell you one quick story. My alma mater, Georgetown University, the law school did something that I found heinous. You can get a student loan, and then, of course, you can do income-based repayment, where you apply to a program, and based on your income, you pay back a certain amount. And the amounts differ depending on what you do. But if you are in public service, it's 10% of your pay for 10 years. And anything left over after that, wiped clean. Now, if you're in law school, you might incur just a touch of debt. Georgetown, you're expected to incur about $180,000 of debt. It's going to cost you $220,000 all in, Georgetown Law. So the school said, look, here's the deal. They have a whole program that they show their incoming students. You come here. We will set you up with these student loans. You can use them to pay for everything, your student living, everything that goes on in your life, because at the grad level you can do that. And when you get out of school, we'll make your student loan payments for 10 years based on you going to work at a public entity like a regulator, the SEC, the FDA, one of those things. And at the end of 10 years, you're free and clear. And by the way, you then roll into private practice as somebody who has 10 years at a regulator and make a fortune. What Georgetown Law did was raise their tuition enough to cover this lovely program, knowing that at the end of the game, the U.S. government takes it all. That'd be all of you and me. Now, it's brilliant. It's immoral, but it's brilliant, right? This is what income-based repayment is doing, and it is exploding. The government expected maybe $7 billion worth. I think they're at $25 billion and counting. And so it's going to be a really big deal, this income-based repayment, that eventually means we as taxpayers take on all of this forgiven debt. So student loans are the problem. When you look at the rest of the debt, going outside of just the consumers, we did have this nice little dip right here, and then we just took on more. So we started to delever a little bit. Consumers started to get rid of some. But then we as a nation decided, no, we'd really like a lot more. And where we did it was at the government level. We've now got over $20 trillion in total government debt. That's federal, state, and local. We've got $14 trillion in financial debt, a little bit in foreign debt, $12.6 in corporate, and the consumer's got $12.6 as well. But it's the government debt that's the big one, right? That's an interesting number up there at $20 trillion. Got to do something with that one day. But we have very low interest rates on it, so it doesn't cost us very much. We're not alone. The rest of the world did it too. This is debt to GDP around the world. Little numbers at the bottom. Ireland's the worst. And the Irish are actually taking this one in the chin. They are trying to pay it down. They're doing their austerity. They're doing everything they were told to do. I think the Irish are just used to suffering, right? I wrote an article about a year ago. I said, that's why you find an Irish bar on every corner. They're used to crying in their beer all the time. I love these guys. So anyway, they assumed all the bad debt at the government level and said, just bring it on. Give us all the bad banks. We'll take all of it and we'll just pay it because that's what we do. The Japanese have been printing money and had it bought by the central bank for a long time. And they have one really big pension fund, the Government Pension Investment Fund, GPIF. And they have about $680 billion worth of Japanese government bonds as well. And so not only do the Japanese have it owned by their central bank, they have it owned by their pension fund too. It doesn't pay anything. 10-year government bonds in Japan yield about 35 basis points. But they own it. We're down here at number 5 or 6, Spain and France. We're kind of in between there. And then it rolls down from there. We're at 358% of GDP. Is it good? Is it bad? I don't think it's good. But we have something the rest of the world doesn't, the rest of the developed world. We have kids. We have kids. And it is a big deal. We actually have that next generation that's going to come along. They got some problems that face them, but we do have them. And very few of these other countries do. When you talk about the millennials, and I talked about their student loan debt, I'm going to talk about their work a little bit. That's one of the biggest problems they have is finding those jobs that we had, finding the type of job that we had. People want to look at it in terms of income. I showed you that median income a couple of minutes ago on the Survey of Consumer Finance. If you look at the median income for families, households, 1967, we're back to 1996 levels. And it's not going up. It's really kind of flatlined. Businesses don't have to pay more. We actually saw a bump in wages in January. And it's because a number of cities around the country bumped their minimum wage starting January 1st. You're seeing a couple of corporations do it. Walmart's doing it. McDonald's is doing it. Starbucks did it. There's one other that I believe announced today is going to do it. That's great. The people at the lowest rung are going to have a little bit more. Those are not median income jobs. And I don't want anybody deciding they're going to make a career of being a burger flipper. That's a bad idea, right? Move up into management, but don't stay there on the grill. People always moan about manufacturing. Manufacturing's decline in our economy. As a percentage of GDP, manufacturing has declined a lot, and people say, well, bring it back, because that's where the jobs are. Especially if you go into the Midwest. When I give this presentation, everybody wants jobs to come back. It doesn't come back like you think. We are reshoring jobs, but you have to look at how it's being done. When you look at the amount we've actually manufactured in terms of billions of dollars, we're doing more. Now, this is 1970. We're actually creating more stuff by several hundred percentage points. I mean, this scale is 200 to 1.8 trillion, right? This is big numbers. The problem is we're not employing people. And that's where the game is played, right? If you look at those two together, you see something interesting here at the end. The red is the number of people we're employing in the manufacturing. The blue is the amount that we're manufacturing in terms of dollars of goods. Since the 2009 crisis, so 2009 through 2013, 25% increase in the amount of stuff we're producing, and we only added 5% to the workforce. That's called productivity. Productivity shot to the moon because it doesn't look like this anymore, right? Manufacturing looks like that. When I reshore, which is what it's called, you offshore, you send jobs overseas, you go produce in some place that's a low-cost producer. When you reshore, you're bringing it back. There are two things I'm taking advantage of in the United States when I reshore. I'm taking advantage of low transportation because the goods are now 100 miles away instead of 10,000 miles away, and I got to get them here on a boat, and very low energy costs. This is not about oil. Oil is recent. This is about natural gas. And believe me, nobody was happier with low natural gas prices in 2008, 9, and 10 than people who make big things. When you make petrochemicals, when you make very large manufactured things, you don't plug stuff into a wall. You use natural gas as your input. Or you have your own generation station on site that uses natural gas to create electricity. And so they saw their feedstock of natural gas drop dramatically in price. And they said, look, that's 2 out of 3, the third one being employment. If I can get my transportation costs down and I can get my energy costs down, then I can afford to bring it back. And so they go retrofit a plant or they build a new one. When you retrofit or you build new, are you going to put the latest technology in? Pretty sure you are. And if I can put a bunch of robots in and not have to deal with, the woman before me was talking about harassment, they never claim harassment. They don't care, right? So you're looking at it, this is what we're doing. We're taking those tasks, automated tasks, repeatable tasks, and we're putting them into robotics. So the jobs aren't going to come from there. The outlook isn't much better. This is the estimate from the Bureau of Labor Statistics in terms of projected employment. Millions of people, 15.3 in 2002, 11.9, supposed to go down even more to 11.4. That's what's bringing even more of the jobs here. With this, we get some declining home ownership, but it's a little weirder than it looks. Home ownership has dropped, and it's actually dropped further than this, and all of you know this better than I do. It's down to about 64%, 63.9 is the last number I saw. It's back to where it was. What we really did is kind of take out this big chunk in the middle. The problem is everybody's looking in their rearview mirror to the last 5 or 6 years and saying, well, yeah, but if we could get back to, 10 years, 2005, wouldn't it be great? Why do we have to go back there? What law of nature says we have to go back to 70% home ownership rate? There isn't one. And so did it make sense for young people to take a loan and then a piggyback to put nothing down on a house to buy it? When I look at the people who dropped out of their housing or lower ownership rates, it really hits the middle of the curve. Under 35 some, 35 to 44 and 45 to 54 were the ones that lost the most. Haven't come back. And first-time home ownership rates have dropped. The National Association of Realtors only started recording this in 2001. That's why it doesn't go back further. But it was in the 40s, dropped to 36 in 2006, and then shot up again, 50% in 2010. Why was that, do you think? Because they got the credit, right? You give me free money to go buy a house, I'm pretty good. And then it drops right back into the 30s, and we're back at 33%. I'm not sure that number is going to come back very fast. If you're not making a great salary and you are saddled with a student loan, are you really going to go take out $250,000 in debt? Maybe, but it could take a while. The problem is it has outcomes. It's not a leveraged savings program, and that's what housing is, right? In the United States of America, you put down 20%, or if you get a Fannie Mae loan, 3.5%. 3.5%, you borrow 96.5%, but all the equity gain is yours. That's why the biggest asset in most Americans' portfolio is their home. It was the one levered asset play they made. But if they don't do it, they're not going to make that savings. They're also not going to buy as many homes, so they're going to have fewer built. New home sales the other day, 481,000. Everyone's cheering. Seriously? 481,000 is a cheer? We were at 1.2 million in the middle of the 2000s. 1.2 million new home starts, or new home sales. And so the fact that we're back close to 500,000, it's a very hollow victory. 500,000 was the low at previous recessions, and we got under 300,000 here. So when you have less construction, you have less employment. You'll have less employment in construction. Those are the middle income jobs. The painters, the plumbers, the roofers, the framers. Those are the guys that the Federal Reserve wants back. Slower attainment of lifetime goals, frankly, they're just not going to be getting married as quickly because of these other things. If they don't do that, that's the one that gets me. Somebody asked me what might change my forecast. If you see the millennials not getting married and not having children, they don't have that motivation to spend like all of us had to. That could keep the economy lower and not coming back as quickly, which would keep interest rates and economic growth lower for longer. But the central bank is going to help us all. And I'm going to run this through very quickly because a lot of it's some math. The central bank started printing money when they saw all this going south. They printed $4 trillion. $4 trillion. Still amazes me. But the Federal Reserve wasn't alone. Everybody did it, right? It was a club. The Federal Reserve did it, the ECB, the European Central Bank, Bank of Japan, People's Bank of China. They were all out there printing money like crazy. What they wanted to have happen was something very interesting that didn't. And I'll tell you how this is supposed to work. And it's going to bend your mind a little bit. Stay with me. End of the day, pretend it's interesting. So if they print trillions of dollars, what do they do with it? And tell you what, we'll go here, because it'll be a whole lot easier. When the Fed prints money, they do not literally print anything. We all use that as a euphemism, or basically a small way of describing something that doesn't really happen. What they literally do is they buy bonds from you, and you have to have an account with me because I'm the Federal Reserve and you're a bank, so it's required. I go into your account at my shop, and I increase your account balance, and you send me bonds. That's how they create money. Darndest thing ever. It's just a little bit of typing. So they type in $1 billion in your account, you send me $1 billion in bonds, you now have $1 billion. What are you going to do with it? You might reinvest it. You might go make loans with it because you're a bank. You might do all sorts of stuff. You have choices. So what you can do is you can lend money to your own clients or you can lend money to other banks. If you don't have enough clients wanting loans, you lend money to other banks. That's the way the game is played. Because the idea is to get as much money beyond your required reserves out of your bank. Otherwise, you're not making any money on this stuff. And so if you lend to your own clients, then you earn the spread. Give them a car loan at 4%, you're paying 10 basis points on deposits, you're making 3.9%. It's a great deal. If you lend to other banks, you're earning the overnight rate, whatever it is. What is that today? 0 to 0.25, depending on how things go during the day. So you're earning something less than 25 basis points. So the Fed came along and they made something called interest on excess reserves. They said, you now have $1 billion you didn't have before. If you just keep it with us, we'll pay you 25 basis points. That's new. That happened in 2000. It was actually brought forward in 2008. This is a brand new deal. And so I won't bore you with all that. This is what excess reserves look like at banks now. $2.7 trillion sit in excess reserves at banks because they're earning interest on it that they wouldn't have earned before. You have a choice. You can lend money to another bank and earn 25 basis points or less, or you can keep your money at the Federal Reserve, the people who print it, and earn 25 basis points. Which would you do? You're probably going to keep it with me because if he runs into a problem, you could have a problem. I don't run into problems. I print money in the back. I have a printing press. The number down here, I know you can't see it, this nothing line from 2000 to 2009, it actually has excess reserves on it, because people did keep them with the Fed before. Right before they started this interest on excess reserve, the number was 1.9 billion in total excess reserves of all banks was kept at the Fed. And now it's 2.7 trillion. If you're wondering how your central bank can print trillions of dollars and it does not end up as credit, this is it. This is the stopper in the bottle. And it's how they keep everything from going crazy. Because if this money was lent out at 2.7 trillion, it would wreak havoc on the economy. This is what would cause runaway inflation and all the crazy things that you hear about. And this is why it's not. And they can do this for as long as they want, because they print money. So no inflation and yields are low. So what do? A normal investor says, I know what I'll do. I'll go look at, let me get through this, high yield bonds. And so they run out and they buy high yield bonds because their overnight isn't paying them, their one-year CDs aren't paying them, and normal bonds aren't paying them anything. German bonds were issued today, 5-year German bonds were issued at negative interest rates. They have had 16 sales of bonds this year so far in Germany, and 9 of them have been negative interest rates. Kind of weird. But we have Americans who want to save more money. We have 80 million boomers who need to prepare for retirement because they got $87,000 in their retirement account. And so what are they doing? They're rushing into high yield. They've rushed into high yield so far that high yield is now about 6%. Find the stinkiest, nastiest company that's issued bonds that you don't want to be associated with, they're paying you 6%. And people are buying them like candy because that's all they got, right? That's all they think they got. We got a stock market that's at a record high with weak economic growth. We got bond prices that are high and yields that are low because nobody wants the money and the central banks are buying. And we got investors caught in the middle. And you know what that leaves? That leaves you. That leaves people doing things like you. I do this for a living, right? I write about economics. I write about financial markets. And people are always asking me, what do you do? And I say, you don't really want to know what I do. Because in my personal account, I own things that you've never heard of. And one of them is notes. And I've owned notes for several years now, and I'm thrilled with it. Because notes provide me with attractive yields in a low interest rate environment. And it's what other people don't recognize. It's more work. See, investing is work. And that's the piece they don't want to do. It's like, fine, you stay out of the business. I'm happy with that. Because the more people that get in, the less I get to buy. And it's cash flow that protects you against deflation. We didn't talk that much about it, but when you have deflation, things cost less, but you earn less. And that's the key. Low interest rates, wages tend to go down, and so you don't have as much cash. It rarely works in deflation that you get ahead because you're still making as much money, but everything costs less. See, that would be a good deal, and good deals don't happen like that. And so what tends to happen is lower earnings on your investments, lower earnings in your earned income, and prices fall, and it becomes a vicious cycle. And cash flow investments save you from that. That's why I got interested in notes and involved in notes to begin with. And the winter season, at least 5 to 7 more years. It could be longer if the millennials push out their savings. Push out the start of their family life. If they're not having kids at the same rate, this thing's going to take a lot longer to come back because they won't be motivated to spend money like all of us spent it. And so with that, I want to thank you for letting me be here, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you got. Thank you. So I presented for a long time, and I've never done one of these where I didn't have any questions. So
I have a question. That remark you made that the German government issued bonds.
That what?
When you said the German government just issued bonds at negative interest rates, why would anybody buy them?
Why would you buy a bond at a negative interest rate? That's a good question. And here's the reason. If you've got $100,000, which is a nice chunk of money, and you're going to invest it, you're going to tell them no. If you've got $10 million and you want to invest it, you're probably going to tell them no. If you've got 150 million euros and all of your expenses are in euros, then you've got to find somewhere to put it that you believe the money will come back to you. And so people are kind of captive in their denominated currency, and they're saying, I don't have another choice. And the biggest hammer in this is that the European Central Bank, the ECB, charges depositors 25 basis points to put money there. And so if you're a large depositor, say you're Siemens and you actually have to make payroll in euro, if you have $10 million in your bank is going to ding you 25 basis points for holding it there, because that's what the ECB charges them. And so what you do instead is you go buy 5-year stupid German government bonds at a negative 8-9 basis point yield, because frankly it doesn't cost you as much, and at least you'll get the money back. So it's a game of big investors and big money, and they're all captive to their central banks.
I just heard Harry Dent on the radio being interviewed last Sunday in Dallas.
And he didn't sound nearly as smart as me, did he?
He sounded different than you, however,
okay.
with some overlap.
Yeah.
And one of the things that affects me both as a real estate investor and a note buyer is the real estate values. So the impression I get is that the values have come back up.
Oh, yeah.
But from what I heard with Harry saying on the radio show, it sounded like they're going to be potentially relatively flat, and we're not expecting inflation. Even though we got all this printing of money, he's expecting potentially deflation rather than inflation. So any comment on projection of real estate values?
So
as they
what
affect notes?
What I showed you up there in terms of the interest on excess reserve, holding all these reserves back at the central bank. That's what's stopping the inflation you would normally think of as so much money being turned into credit and then more money chasing the same number of goods causes inflation, blah, blah, blah. So I don't see inflation from that standpoint. On real estate, there's a couple of things. One, real estate's local. If you own real estate in New York or Miami, it's going to be different from Jacksonville and Kansas City. I know that to be true. I do not believe overall we're going to see real estate go up in price. I think it's going to be wildly different in markets. I would not want to own a bunch of real estate in Jacksonville, right? I may want to hold notes there, but I don't want to own the property itself, because I think prices could go back down. Now, I don't see them dropping 30, 40, 50%. And Harry will say that. He believes that in some areas it could drop that much. If you told all the foreign buyers in Miami they had to get out, you would see prices drop dramatically, because a lot of absentee owners. But barring something like that, which Singapore is doing right now, I don't think you're going to see it here. But I do believe you're going to see second and third tier markets start to fall off in value some, because I think they got ahead of themselves.
Because I just was in Miami, I couldn't believe all the cranes building and like the $1 million condos going up. But it seemed like it's coming in from South America, from Europe.
Yeah, if you don't speak Portuguese, you're not selling anything, because that's what the Brazilians speak, is Portuguese. And so that's what's driving all the money into Miami. When you go to Vancouver, it's the Chinese. Australia has the same problem. They just announced a program, I want to say last week, that they're going to start charging a fee on foreign buyers, and it's because the Chinese are bringing all their money over. So.
What do you foresee for the lower income employees now that so much is being overtaken by robotics?
Interestingly, that happened a long time ago. The lowest level of employment that could be taken by robotics happened 15 years ago. It's coming into the middle group. It's coming into the more of the programmers, the CAD operators. You can really take out people who you would thought of as middle income. And so, $40, $50, $60, $70,000 a year people. Lower income, I think of in the 25 to 40, the people who are 150% of poverty. And they've already been pushed out, and they're all in service. And the hard thing about service is everyone's a cost. When you go to McDonald's today, somebody takes your order. That's not going to last. It's going to be an iPad. And they've tested it in a couple of markets. It's easier for them if you do your order, because you're probably going to do it right. And then you're going to have Apple Pay or Loop Pay or something else to where you're basically going to touch your card to it and a ping, and you're going to be done. And so we're going to start getting rid of the service providers as best we can, because for a business, they're a cost. That's going to be the really hard part. I didn't touch on education here, but we actually graduate just over 80% of people of high school age. That means 1 in 5 people in America don't get a high school diploma. They're the people. They're the ones we've got a real problem with. We don't count them in much of anything. They're not counted in people going to college, they're not counted in anything. And yet they're 20% full of our youth. What are they going to do? I have no idea. Get on welfare. That's a problem. Welfare almost doesn't exist anymore.
Any more questions?
You people must be really thirsty.
Or really hungry?
Okay,
Please
put
give-
your hands
please give
together for
Rodney a
Mr.
huge
Johnson. Thank you.
Thanks, Rodney. That was great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
How many of you guys think it might be beneficial as you're looking capital
Go back to that slide real quick. That
to
last
know a few of those things? This is one thing. I started just listening to Survive and Prosper. Right? They have a free email newsletter that you can get on and get a lot of the information free. The Boom and Bust. I think it's like
It's all on harrydent.com
$49 a year,
Yeah.
year to be able to stay on top and get a lot of this data to help you. You know, so you guys feel that might be helpful in talking to people. They want to know where the market's going and helping them. So we are so grateful that he made this trek to come out here, and it's been phenomenal. So